Welcome to the Rainmaker Multiplier on Demand, a podcast for leading financial professionals, or rainmakers, and their teams that offer support for securing a successful future. From marketing help to staffing structure, listen and subscribe for actionable insights from advisors and skilled professionals alike.
Thanks for joining. Today's a really important topic, at least from a marketing perspective. And the reason we want to really understand your website is there's primarily a couple places that somebody looks when they want to understand who you are. So they may have seen an ad, and that's great, but they're either looking at your social channels, how active you are, LinkedIn, your credentials, but most likely they're going to your website to understand who you are, who you serve, and what makes you different than the advisor down the street. So I'm really pleased to be able to host the next 30 minutes or so, or a little bit less, with people I work very closely with. And for those that work with the agency, they know Missy Shermer quite well. Missy manages the account relationships with all of our agencies, project management, and really focuses on website design and making sure that everybody is in the right place, including myself. The next person on our team that will be participating is Owen. Owen really has done a tremendous job since he's joined us within the last year. He's our digital marketing expert and has a great deal of knowledge in SEO and lead generation. So we're going to kind of attack your website from both angles, not only what I'll say cosmetically and content as it relates to who you are, but also how you get found both by, I'll say, Google and eventually the AI engines. So we're going to kind of jump in to try to answer a couple questions is what makes a financial website both beautiful and effective, how to improve your SEO without sacrificing user experience and sounding authentic, and what does it take to kind of future-proof your web presence in a highly competitive and regulated and AI space. So one of the first things that we do is when we have an engagement, even before I meet an advisor, even when I meet an advisor is I look at their social presence. And I also look at their websites. So let's just kind of open it up. And Missy, when you look at a website for the first time, what are you looking at? What are the first things that come to your mind as a kind of consumer/marketing perspective guru?
Yeah, so there's two things that I kind of focus on when I start reviewing a website, and that's UX and UI. You probably heard those terms kind of floating around in the website world. They're two different things that kind of work together. So UX actually stands for user experience, which is the feel of the website, the ease of use, the speed through which you can navigate, and the clarity that the messaging brings to you as a user. So I kind of ask myself a few questions when I'm running through websites, starting with the homepage. Can I tell what the website or the firm is offering from the first couple glances? Are the pages easy to navigate using the navigation in the menu at the top? Is that something that flows well and helps me to understand what the services are and how I can get in touch? And is it easy to find answers to all of my questions? An example is that, when I get onto a financial advisor's site, I always look for, can I find the services that they provide, and can I see who they serve easily? And there should be multiple points on every page for them to be able to get in touch with you, either through buttons or links. UI is actually user interface. So that's going to be more of the aesthetic of your website, the look and feel and the layout of the website. I look for a couple different things, and these might be pretty obvious to some people, but they can be overlooked and they're pretty important. Are the fonts consistent across the site? A font kit usually includes like one header font and then a body copy font. Do the colors reflect the brand and logo? Are they consistent across the website? And does the spacing of the text and the imagery allow for smooth consumption of the information? Consider your brand elements. If you haven't established primary and secondary colors, that's something you should consider, and they should reflect your logo. And when you think, this doesn't seem like it's very important, but you should think about it as a user from a user's perspective. If their website is this messy and hard to use, how will they handle my money? If your website is attractive and easy to use, then that'll establish trust with them and make them possibly want to move forward with your firm.
Great insights. And whether we're talking about financial services or any website, I'm sure, or maybe it's just me, but when you're trying to find out what somebody does, especially in what I do, I get a lot of emails, and occasionally I'll open some and say, this kind of looks interesting. I go to their website and I'm like, I still don't know what you offer. And that's a problem. So really kind of make sure you hone in on your message right at the top. We'll talk a little bit about, scroll and above the fold and below the fold. So for those that don't know what a fold is, it means it's the copy that's apparent on a particular page before you have to scroll down. And people are like, well, how much information? Everything has to be above the scroll. And I would kind of say, not really. You have to make sure that you articulate who you are. And your content has to be engaging enough that somebody actually wants to move down the page. So if you're kind of concerned that, well, nobody scrolls down past kind of the fold, then I want to challenge you that your content isn't engaging enough. So Missy, kind of the opposite. What if someone doesn't really consider user experience and kind of a user interface? What's the negative, given you've kind of introduced those terms?
Sure. I mean, think about it as your own self, like experiencing a website. If you aren't able to navigate a website, you're not going to stick around. You're going to leave. So that'll increase your bounce rates, which can affect SEO. You don't want to confuse the visitors to your site. You want them to easily understand what's going on so that they can convert. Fewer leads and lower engagement come from high bounce rates. So it all ties into the engagement and the efficacy of your website. It's just as simple as if they can't use it, they're not going to stick around.
And just to clarify, a bounce rate is if somebody comes to a particular page and leaves. So they bounce off of one page, they don't engage and go deeper. So if you have metrics and Google Analytics, and what we're going to turn our attention to Owen in a second about what he looks at, but if you have engagement, you want to look at how many pages are people visiting, how long is someone staying on a particular page. So Owen, I'll ask you a question, not necessarily from a design and a UX perspective, but talk about from an SEO perspective, when you first look at a website, what are you looking at?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. One of the first things that I like to look at, which is often overlooked, is that the website is using local SEO. So things like city-specific keywords that are where your target audience is. So naming the city strategically and placing the words near me around them, just to make sure that you are at least casting that organic net, organic meaning content that you don't pay for. Copy that's just on your web page to help people find you. You want to make sure that you're listing those cities in your copy so that when people are searching, financial advisor near me, holistic wealth management near me, it's going to hit on those local SEO areas, because that is basically, free marketing in a sense. Then I kind of look at the page speed. So how fast things are loading on the page, because Google, the way it ranks your content is on speed. So if you have a slow moving page, you might have some old code running. You might want to do, some optimizations there to improve the speed of how it's being crawled, because that affects how those keywords are being then served up in the search engine when people are searching for them. And then from there, I assess whether the content is really speaking to the target audience. Like Harry was mentioning before, is it even clear what this brand is offering? So taking a look at the clarity of how it's being perceived from there, and putting yourself in the mindset of your own audience. And then I'll take a look at what keywords that the site is organically ranking for already. Maybe there are some keywords that somebody put on there that were not so good and putting you in the wrong market. And maybe you're doing a great job and there's room for other, more niche keyword search terms to include. So from front to back, it's really just kind of a high level look of how your website is functioning and where to improve and what's doing well.
Thank. I've seen on different websites where people, whether it's a plumbing or a contractor, and they list 40 different cities that, we serve. And again, they list 40. What are your thoughts about kind of that idea?
Sorry, I was taking a look at Charlie's question here. I wanted to, do you mind if I answer that real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Charlie, just are people really searching for holistic financial planning? And the answer is yes. J.L. Smith did get a client that, or at least a good prospect from searching holistic wealth management. And so, yes, it is a term that people are using through word of mouth and it's catching on. So we are still obviously going to be ranking for terms like financial advisor, but holistic financial planning is moving up in the search ranks. So to answer your question, yes.
All right. So Owen, like going back to my question, what you talk about advisors near me. What do you think about those sites that have 40 cities listed all consecutively? Is that a good practice? What does Google think of that?
No, it makes it a little bit more confusing for Google to understand. And we are kind of entering the realm of SEO in which your search queries are trying to be understood rather than just ranked and crawled. So more than ever, it's important to only be focusing on your target audience and not keyword stuffing, as I say, lumping a bunch of things in there because that can actually kind of do you a disservice down the line.
Makes sense. Missy, you talked a lot in your first answer, mostly about design, certainly being authentic to yourself and who you serve. But how do you incorporate kind of a unique voice or brand? What is brand voice into a website? So we're not just talking about design, but we're also talking about what I'll say content beyond SEO.
Yeah. So when you work with the agency at C2P, one of the first things that we do with you is we establish a brand messaging guide. We interview you extensively about your firm. We want to know everything from what services you provide, who you serve, everything like that, to your mission and your purpose and your passion, like what drives you as an advisor. And we kind of put that all into one really neat guide. And we use that with all of the content that we create and when we're building out your website. How I use that when I'm designing a website is I'm tying in things like with when I think about imagery, I'm tying in, local pride. A lot of people that we work with are close to a major metro or they're from a major metro. We use imagery to solidify that they are part of the community. We use imagery of the team to establish trust. People would much rather see a person on a website than none because it establishes that there's an actual person there that's going to be handling your money and handling your business. And we also, I kind of use it, this is a little bit more subjective, but color psychology is a thing in marketing. Everybody knows that. There's lots of opportunity for using it to drive people, like using bright colors to drive people certain places. But when it comes to a brand voice, we tend to try and stick with the logo colors and then use that to reflect the brand. One of the examples that came to mind when I was thinking about this morning is we work with Evergreen. They use a lot of dark greens on their website to kind of establish that like evergreen trust, and that is all over their brand messaging. So we use brand voice to establish the design for websites and all of our content.
And how does voice play into obviously SEO and kind of creating your niche and being differentiated?
Yeah, that's a good question. Fortunately, in our niche of holistic wealth management, the architecture and the framework is kind of already established. So the real challenge is in the art and science of conveying each advisor's unique brand essence within that framework of a way that's authentic and resonant and clear. And you might ask, why does that matter or why is that important from a search perspective? Well, if you think about Google's original mission, which was to organize information and make it universally accessible and useful, well, that still does drive how AI search is evolving today. So traditional SEO emphasized more on keywords, backlinks, metadata, ranking pages. So some of those tactics are a little bit outdated and effective now, and modern search engines are far more intelligent. So with the advancement of Google's search generative experience and ChatGPT now prioritizing intent and meaning and context, it is craving human written content more than ever. So search engines are not just scanning for keywords, they're interpreting your brand's essence. So just like, car engines have, evolved from, old raw horsepower to, modern fuel efficiency, SEO has also evolved as well to something that I call search essence optimization, where relevance is rooted in clarity, credibility, and emotional resonance and raw human written content. So success isn't really just being about found, it's about your brand being understood through the search engines and trusted by both humans and machines.
So you talk about machines and really it's, there's not a day that goes by where you don't hear AI or ChatGPT. Certainly I use it. Perhaps we use this for today's presentation to get some stats where I can kind of, tell me 5 stats that are important for XYZ, and it will do that. So how does a advisor potentially tailor their website, if such a thing, to be able to also be able to be found through the AI platforms? Because to me, AI platform is almost overtaking the Google world of kind of just going to Google. Instead, sometimes I'm just going to Chat GPT and kind of ask that same question, and I'm getting a better response, which will hold off on what Google's doing about AI. But let's just focus this on how do you appear in AI.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's really AI is craving more human created content than ever. So for in C2P's case, we have a lot of incredible thought leadership that we were able to repurpose, and we find that a lot of that content does well because it came from someone with actual real expertise and authority. And we recommend that advisors do the same thing when it comes to their content. Go back down to the basics, pencil and paper, pen and paper, write down a couple real thoughts and start with that. And then you will kind of shock AI by what it gives you. And then from there, it starts to kind of give it that human touch into the AI without being a little too spammy. You really just want to be searching for your target audience and not throwing stuff and keywords in there. It's really more about communicating with your ideal prospect than trying to get in front of everybody's faces. It's a way more direct, streamlined interaction that you can have with your audience and your target audience.
What are some ways that an advisor might be able to establish credibility, whether it's on their website or social? How does the AI LLMs pick up that says, Stoyan's an expert in what he does? So how do you communicate that?
Well, it's all across a whole bunch of different channels. You want to have your LinkedIn. You want to have all your thought leadership and regularly posting on LinkedIn. You also want to make sure that your content on your website is reading naturally, and not just the content, but the way that it's named, like your titles and the H1s. It crawls your content kind of by, if you say that the title would be like the top of the outline. So it's looking for sequential ways to really kind of put people into the right funnel. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Missy, I don't know if it's just me, but after work, I probably don't touch a laptop, and I'm on my phone looking at websites and whether it's social media, but because we're talking about websites, so talk a little bit about the what mobile optimization and responsiveness means, and how you need to design things or even phrase things for the mobile experience.
Yeah, so most website platforms that you will use, a lot of people that we work with use FMG. There's others, and then some people work with developers. You're often able to preview a web page before you post it or publish it. I always recommend, and what I do is I always preview it on my phone as well as the desktop before I publish it. And that is because according to Statista, 62.54% of global traffic is actually mobile nowadays. That sounds crazy, but I mean, there are people who don't have computers and rely solely on their phones. And that also includes like tablets, because those are considered mobile devices because they use the apps. So you should always just be checking that preview on both your desktop and your phone. And when you're using your phone, you need to make sure that the font is big enough for people to read, because sometimes it's big enough on a desktop, but not on a mobile. You want to make sure that all of your images aren't getting, dynamically adjusted so that they're cropped weird or you can't see something. And you want to make sure that you have your CTA button set up so that while they're scrolling down, there's one available periodically so that they can get in touch when they need to.
Yeah, one of the easiest things is to look and make sure your desktop version doesn't say click on the button to the right or to the left,
Right.
because likely on mobile it's going to be below. So just kind of look at the user experience, and so not only obviously visually, but think about the words that you have and leading that. So let's actually talk about how compliance, what you need to consider. Certainly everything we're talking about before anything goes live, bounce it off your compliance group. But Missy, I know many of the advisors on this call have won a lot of awards and have a lot of great testimonials. Can you use awards and testimonials on websites? And again, I want to preference this, that regardless of what we say, make sure you bounce everything off of compliance. But what are some things that you have to consider when you're talking about awards? Because certainly you want to promote those, and same with testimonials.
Yeah. So SEO best practices, whenever you're just looking up general best practices for SEO, it always says to mention testimonials and awards on your website. With PCA compliance and most compliance companies, there's a little bit of extra work that you have to do for those. For the awards, I'll start with the awards. The best practice is actually just to display only one or two of the most significant awards, because when you post an award, you have to have a disclosure that is equally prominent and visible to the award text. So sometimes, with all of our advisors, there's a big PCA disclosure in the footer of the website, and that kind of encompasses everything. But for the award specifically, the disclosure needs to be near the award and it needs to be the same size font as the rest of the text. It could get a little bit clunky when you have multiple of those. And it just affects, just site overall like flow. So we recommend sticking with one or two of those. And to move on to testimonials, I'm actually going to have Dustin speak a little bit on this. So I'm going to hand it over to Dustin to talk about ways that you can gather testimonials.
Yeah. So testimonials fall into the same simple rules that as far as displaying them, right, with equally prominent disclosures and things like that. Now, when it comes to sourcing them, you need to avoid some kind of cherry picking rules, right? You can't just reach out to your favorite clients that are very jovial and say, "Hey, can you write me a nice review?" That just is not allowed under their rules, right? So we recommend asking for them in client meetings, face to face. That's a really good place to do that if you have the option to do that. Another good way to do that is if you have client appreciation events, and then you send out an event survey, and then you include a section that says, "Hey, is there anything else you'd like us to know?" That's usually chock full of really good fodder for stuff like that. Then again, though, to alluding to what Missy said about the awards, as I would only pick your favorites and maybe the ones that are most relevant to your topics and what's maybe most recent too. Keep them pretty fresh. Me and Matt have talked about this before as well, where it's like once you start getting a lot of them, then it's like really, what do you expect somebody to really look at? What do you expect them to focus on? So that's my take on those.
Yeah, I called Dustin in because Dustin is really the expert here. And we actually have been back and forth about the testimonial thing a lot, me and Dustin, because I've been working on these websites. One thing I do want to call out is that Google and Facebook testimonials are not allowed with PCA clients on websites. And it's because there's no way to archive and monitor those communications effectively. With those Google and Facebook testimonials, we just don't recommend that you use those just because we aren't able to monitor archive.
Perfect. Thanks, Missy. And thanks, Dustin, for jumping in. Certainly, we can work with you, especially if you're an agency client, about how to leverage awards. There's lots of different ways we do it. Oftentimes, we put one or two maybe on the homepage. And I really happen to like a separate page if you have many. And you can kind of list it. You can have a logo and to the right, explain what the award was and have the disclosure prominent, but don't put too many on the homepage. We only have a few minutes left, so we've covered a lot. We certainly can make this into a much longer session. Owen, what are the two or three things you've touched on a lot that maybe the advisors can kind of walk away today and just make sure they've got this is what I'll call the low-hanging fruit?
I just want to first say that, believe it or not, in compliance is kind of a hidden gem and sort of it's helpful in SEO because it forces you to kind of make your content way more accurate and balanced and review it. It could slow down the timing, sure, but what I've been talking about this whole time is trust, expertise, and authority. So when you take that time and everything is compliant, it does reward you a little bit better. So I found that it's actually kind of a helpful tool in that. So I would say one of the takeaways that you can start immediately doing is go to your own site, put yourself in the shoes of your ideal prospect, and does that make sense to you? And then kind of do some searches straight up through Google and search things that you think your prospects might be searching and see where you fall in there. And then let us know hey, I came up with this, or start thinking about the questions that your ideal prospects are asking you. And then maybe we can do a Q&A page on your website about things that speak directly to what your prospects are talking about. So, one of the things that I could say you could do immediately is really start speaking to your audience in the terms that you hear them say on those one-on-one calls.
I think that's great for all copy, whether it's a website or writing blogs. It's converting what are you hearing from your clients and using their words which is what they're going to end up searching on. We did have one question, and I think it's a very interesting question and kind of a couple schools of thought of, should you put your fees structure on your page? Lots of different thoughts. My initial response to that is I absolutely think you should be very clear on who you work with. So is it $1 million in minimum assets? Is it a particular niche? Is it dentists and all of that? What I would say in terms of cost, if you have a question and answer section or a paragraph, is you can talk about being a fiduciary. You can talk about your fee structure. I'm not sure that I would get into the very specific percentages of over $1 million, it's 0.3, over 2 million, it's 0.2, whatever the case may be, because I don't want to commoditize it. I don't want someone shopping, but I absolutely think that, our fee is paid based on how well your portfolio does or managing the total portfolio. But I would probably leave this very specifics because if someone's interested in trying to say, well, I'm paying 0.22 over here and I'm going to move over to 0.18, I'm not sure that's the type of clients you're looking for. But I also think that it's very fair game to put what we charge for a planning fee. That I would very much do is $2,500, $5,000, and this is what you get. So there's no surprises. So I tend to say for onboarding in terms of an initial fee, and you can even say that fee gets waived if you move your assets to us. That gets applied to your first annual charge or something to that effect. So we are just a couple minutes away. I hope you found this very valuable. Missy and Owen, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for helping out with C2P and our agency clients. So appreciate everybody's time. And we're here if you have additional questions or need any help. Thank you all.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Never miss an episode by subscribing now to discover new resources and strategies. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help scale and secure your business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.